from the NewsChannel 5 network. This is Inside Politics, sponsored by United Health Group.
Hello, everyone. I'm NewsChannel 5's political analyst, Pat Nolan. Welcome to Inside Politics. Our guest today is Nashville Democratic Congressman Jim Cooper. It seems Washington has once again become the center of American politics. It almost disappeared off the map, it seemed to me, sometimes during last year's election. Congressman, thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Pat. Always good to be with you.
Now, foreign policy and military action have kind of come to the forefront in the last week or so. We had the launching of the cruise missiles, attacks on Syria by President Donald Trump after the Syrian government used chemical weapons against their own people. Now the U.S. military this week has used the nation's largest non-atomic weapon, the mother of all bombs, as it's called, against ISIS in Afghanistan. You're a member of the Armed Services Committee. What do you make of all these moves?
Well, first, I'm proud of our military. And I hope that our president is tuned into what's really happening because, you know, the other day on TV, he couldn't remember Syria, the country he just ordered bombed. So we have to have civilian control of the military. Trump is very new to this, and he is showing that he can learn. But there's a disturbing video game aspect of this to me. It's very easy to push a button in Washington or one of our Air Force bases and send a bomb. It's very hard to know actually the impact of that bomb in one of these foreign countries. The
use of the mother of all bombs, I know it was used in Afghanistan against ISIS, but there is some speculation it may be also a warning to the North Koreans about what they're doing with their nuclear weapons and missiles.
Well, the Korean leader is crazy, he's immature, and sometimes he needs to see firsthand America's magnificent military capability. And actually the mother of all bombs is just a small piece of what we've got. But it is deeply impressive. It's an amazing weapon, 11,000 tons of explosive. That's a lot.
Now, we've also got a naval force right off the Korean Peninsula if the North Korean leader wants to take a look out and see it. Is that the next place we're going to hit? Is that the next war game we're going to have?
Well, I wouldn't have thought so, but I think that the vice president being sent to South Korea is probably a sign that things are closer to a conflict than I would have thought, because my guess is, and it's just a guess, that that's to reassure our South Korean allies that we really do care about them and we're going to stand up with them because they are very threatened by North Koreans' conventional weapons.
Obviously, events are driving this, but this particular change in the Trump administration is changing their strategy and their policy about some of these things. They've changed their strategy about Syria. They've changed their strategy about Russia, to some extent about China. Is this because they want to mean business, show they're the new guys on the block and don't mess with us? Or is this also sort of taking a little diversion away from some of the issues they face at home?
Well, the positive interpretation is that Trump is learning on the job. The negative interpretation is he's betraying many of his campaign promises, because the last week or two have been nothing like his campaign talk. So I think it's good if he's listening to military advisors, but some of his key campaign advisors like Steve Bannon could be on their way out.
The use of military force like this used to be something in the Constitution that Congress had to authorize. It was considered an act of war. Should we just take that out of the Constitution? It doesn't seem to be something that is never used by any president anymore.
Well, as usual, Pat, you're exactly right. We really haven't declared a formal war since World War II. That means Korea, Vietnam, other huge wars were not officially wars. In today's age, when instantaneous communication and push-button bombing can happen, the old laws seem increasingly out of date, so we need to update those so that we still have civilian and popular control of our military.
But should the president now come to Congress when you come back into session to sort of explain what his policy is? Is there a Trump policy? What the strategy is for the things, whether he does that in a nationally televised address or in some classified briefings before the various committees? Because right now most congressmen are getting all their news about these things overseas from the news media.
You're exactly right. The War Powers Act of 1973 would indicate that he would have to come to Congress within 60 days to tell us what in fact had happened, so that we could get the after-action reports, and that's what really matters. What you see on TV may or may not be significant. We need to know the actual military impact of each of these strikes. So I hope the president will do that. I'm certain that his aides will be doing that. But going to war and committing American troops is a very grave responsibility.
President Trump said he made the attack in Syria because Syria had crossed, he said, many lines in the attack they made against their people with chemical weapons. President Obama talked about crossing a red line when he was in president, but he never did anything about the use by and then no attacks anyway, Is that a sign that Donald Trump perhaps is a stronger leader, more willing to act militarily than President Obama was?
Well, President Obama did put in special forces troops. Now, those are secret and not heralded. It's not a TV campaign the way Trump seems to have preferred. We don't know the impact of these 59 Tomahawk missiles, and I'm deeply worried. You know, when the president warned the Russians an hour in advance, that could have given the Russians very valuable telemetry, because they have a lot of equipment right there on site, and they were not going to be targeted, but they were able to monitor, in fact, the way our cruise missiles worked. I'm sure the Russians also tipped off the Syrians, so it's almost an attack without effect if you have tipped off the enemy before you fire.
This early warning to the Russians, doesn't that sort of reinforce, although he's changing his rhetoric about Russia, and so is his administration, doesn't that sort of reinforce a relationship with Russia that he's been trying to say is not really there?
Well, every American should be deeply upset about how Russia attacked our campaign last time and tried to influence our campaign. And also the continuing Trump relationship with Russia, of his aides, of his business ties. That is something that is being thoroughly investigated right now by multiple House committees and by the FBI. But we need to get to the bottom of this. In general, we don't want relations to be any worse with Russia than they have to be. But there seems to be a certain coziness that is deeply disturbing, because the Russian leadership are not our friends.
But also disturbing to people was that when President Obama was president, he worked with the Russians to put together a deal that everybody thought, or at least it was announced, that all the chemical weapons had been done away with or moved out of Syria. That turned out not to be true. Is that another situation where the President Obama didn't quite do his full job on that, or didn't follow up?
I think a more balanced view is that 67,000 tons of chemical weapons were removed from Syria and were destroyed. We don't know about these new weapons, whether they were supplied by the Russians or whether Assad has built some new weapons. But the third largest chemical stockpile in the world was destroyed. And it's not just us knowing this. Many of our allies in Europe helped us destroy these weapons. So that's verifiable that those weapons were taken off the table, but not all of them were eliminated.
Congressman Jim Cooper is our guest. We'll continue our conversation with him after he watches these messages.
This is a